officers from the Thai Army and Secret Service people who were planning to come here to observe the meeting. So of course we reacted to this and asked the Foreign Office to respond and call the Thai Embassy, which they did. And so the Foreign Office has officially complained to the Thai Embassy and have asked them not to disturb this meeting. So we're very happy that we have a democratic space here. We obviously want to have an open debate where different opinions are listened to. But what we won't tolerate is if anyone tries to disrupt the meeting, interrupt speakers, if people are rude to people with a different opinion. And if that happens, then I will ask you to leave politely. And if you don't leave, then we're going to call the police. The police know about this meeting, they are informed, they're ready to jump in if something happens. But I think it looks like we're going to have a very civilized and exciting discussion. So let's kick off with the first session. I'll introduce the speakers. On my left we have Nicola, who was a journalist in Thailand for 13 years. So she's been at the front of it all since Thaksin came to power.
I entered the country in April 2002.
Yeah.
So he was already in office for 1 year.
So it'll be interesting to Nicola will kick off the debate. Then to my right I have Andrew MacGregor Marshall, who is was also a journalist in Thailand for many years. For a couple of years. But is also known for his book Kingdom in Crisis, which I think the main selling point is that it's banned in Thailand. Right?
Exactly, yeah. That might mean all means selling point, but everything I do is like banned in Thailand, really.
It is actually a very good read. I enjoyed it immensely. So Andrew will be going next, and then on my far left here, Giles Ungpakorn, a prominent critic and activist, social and political activist, also known for several books, which I can warmly recommend, which A Coup for the Rich and The Struggle for Democracy in Thailand.
Thailand's Crisis.
Yeah, but the one before I like it. So Jai will be the third speaker. So what we're going to do is we're going to let the speakers go first. They have 20 to 30 minutes. Then there'll be an opportunity for questions. Then we'll have another 1.5 hours for a proper discussion where I'll open the floor and where I'll also moderate the discussion to focus on a couple of points that might be relevant. So, without further ado, I'll let Nicola start.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you for this kind invitation, Oliver, and the introduction, and thanks to you for being here. As Oliver already mentioned, I used to be a freelance foreign correspondent, having lived in Bangkok for more than 13 years, and in October 2015 I left the country. But I still consider Bangkok my home, although present Thailand today is actually a very different place from when I entered the country first in April 2002. What we see today is a country ruled by a military regime which seeks to entrench its dictatorship by all means possible, by fear and intimidation, by mass arrests, by so-called attitude adjustments in military camps, by the abuse of the draconian lèse-majesté law, and an undemocratic constitution. And one of the reasons why I left was that I did not want to bow to self-censorship anymore when it comes to issues of the monarchy. As a journalist, as well as academics or activists, everyone has to decide for himself or herself in which way they could cover Thailand accurately when they are forced to omit the monarchy and the topic of the monarchy network. And in present-day Thailand, we see the military junta in what I would call an unpredictable partnership of convenience with the new king Vajiralongkorn, who is loathed and despised even among royalists, and I will elaborate further what I mean by this, by the partnership of convenience. So the ruling generals who consider themselves as guardians of the monarchy are abusing the draconian lèse majesté law in a way we have never seen before, as far as I can recall, claiming to protect the palace when in fact they are only protecting themselves and their craving for power. Basically, nothing has changed since King Bhumibhol's death in October 2016, only that the junta is exploiting this abysmal law in an increased manner. We will debate during this seminar in which way Thailand is moving towards a more absolute monarchy, who represents the real power behind the throne. So one thing is clear, Thailand was thrown back into the dark ages after the latest coup. So the dark side of the force has won so far. The topic of our panel is Thailand towards absolutism, 85 years on democratic construction and destruction. And the latest and enduring crisis since 2006, I think, is a very clear example of how democratic structures have been destroyed by military coups and so-called judicial coups. I know that you all know the situation in Thailand very well, but let me share some very personal experiences I made as a foreign journalist back then. And let me start with a situation I witnessed only 2 days after the latest coup. It was Saturday, the 24th May 2014, in the afternoon, when anti-coup protesters met at Victory Monument in Bangkok. And the mood in the capital was very tense this afternoon, since people protesting the coup were completely frustrated. So the skywalk at the Victory Monument was packed with people. I met so many who carrying signs reading "fuck the coup," sorry for my language, I'm just quoting, and "rest in peace Thai democracy," and "we want elections," and "pray you'd go out." So one of the female protesters I talked to, she really tried to blink away her tears, and she said, "It's a shame, yeah, that this coup happened, and these are really sad times for Thailand." And she said she feels so embarrassed by this coup, because she said, "I'm now in another mood to explain to my friends abroad, to the international community, why for the hell the military staged another coup in Thailand. I feel so ashamed and I feel so frustrated," she said. And those protesters back then, they would not dare, they would not care about the ban imposed by the army that forbids a gathering of more than 5 people. And soldiers kept watching. Some of them stood at the skywalk and the stairs of the skywalk, and they were checking the situation unfolding. And when several journalists and photographers, and my partner and me among them, started to take pictures of the soldiers, one of the army officers reacted very harshly, so demanding that we would erase our photos, otherwise our cameras would be seized. And as freelancers with a modest income, we were heavily dependent on our technical equipment, so we reluctantly agreed. And as a matter of fact, this has been actually the first time ever that soldiers interfered with my work, so in my personal case. It did not happen at the time of the coup against Thaksin Shinawatra in September 2006, nor did it happen shortly after the army crackdown on the red shirts in 2010, when soldiers tried to deny me entrance to Ratchaprasong area, which I have visited several times in 2010. And I heard some of the soldiers whispering behind my back, and I asked one of my Thai colleagues what they said, and my Thai colleague replied, "Oh, they were saying this is Thai-style democracy." Thai-style democracy. So, talking about the destruction of democratic structures in Thailand, the putsch on 22nd May, we all know, did not happen out of a sudden. It had a pretext, a background. And the chain of events had started over 10 years ago with street protests of the Yellow Shirts, the so-called People's Alliance for Democracy. And those demonstrations, we all know, paved the way for the coup against Thaksin on 19 September 2006. And the PAD accused Thaksin of corruption, abuse of power, and last but not least, of being disloyal to King Bhumibol Adulyadej. And the first large protest of the PAD I witnessed was in early February 2006. So masses of people dressed in yellow t-shirts gathered at Royal Plaza and said Thaksin should go out, he should be ousted because he sold his company Shincorp to the Singapore government investment holding Temasek without paying taxes on that deal worth about $1.9 billion. And funnily enough, when I was doing interviews with PAD protesters, they only mentioned corruption, abuses of power and disloyalty to the king for the reasons that Thaksin should be ousted. They did not talk once about the gross human rights violations under Thaksin's reign, war on drugs, violence in the Deep South, and the forced disappearance of Muslim lawyer Samchain Lapajit, just to mention a few examples. So my opinion is when it comes to the issues of corruption and abuses of power, including severe human rights violations, the military itself should be in the dock, as the army is the most corrupt and power-abusing institution in the country. But PAD protesters calling for a military coup, calling to intervene, the army to intervene. So and since 2006, we have seen a certain pattern of political conflict. This all happened in order to oust Thaksin, the so-called Thaksin regime, and the whole political network of the Shinawatra clan. A military coup, of course, is a political disaster in itself. And from the perspective of some military circles, the 2006 coup went awfully wrong. It was aimed to wipe out Thaksin and the Thaksin regime and to maintain the status quo of a royalist Thailand, of a country where the old and conservative elites were called the shots and no one else. And I think a lot of people, many people anticipated back then already that this would become much more difficult after Bhumibhol's death, once Vajiralongkorn would become king. And as Vajiralongkorn, as head of state now, the myth of a loving father of the nation could not be longer upheld. So we have seen in 2008 what I would call the resurrection of the PAD vowed then to oust the PPP-led government. Those protests culminated in the occupation of Government House and the Suvarnabhumi airport. And after that, in the end, in early December 2008, Thailand's constitutional court ruled to dissolve the PPP and to ban leading political figures for 5 years. And of course, this was rightly criticized as a judicial coup against a popular elected government. And finally, with the backing of the army, and then Army Chief Armapong Pauchinda, the Democrat Party-led government under Abhisit Vejjajiva came to power. And at that time, every one of us anticipated a new round of political conflict in Thailand because the stage was set now for the protests of the red shirts in 2009 and 2010. And lots of them were supporters or are supporters of Thaksin. They took to the streets to demand the dissolution of parliament and fresh elections. I cannot tell how many interviews I did back then, but I found one case very interesting because there were several people joining protests or observing the speeches who were not necessarily supporters of Thaksin, but who came to listen to the speeches anyway. And I recall to have met a young man who said he just came to listen to the speeches. He was not a supporter, but he agreed with the red shirts on the issue of having free and fair elections. He said, I want to choose the prime minister by myself, via elections. I don't want the military or via political intrigue, the prime minister to be chosen. I want to have elections to choose the prime minister for myself. And during this spring 2010, we experienced the worst political violence in Bangkok since Black May 1992, when the Thai army cracked down on the red shirts on 10th of April and finally on 19th May 2010 at Ratchaprasong. And I recall very well that several parts of inner Bangkok were like a war zone back then. And several red shirt protesters I talked to and I interviewed, they told me before the army was moving in at the end that they were afraid. They told me they know that the army would come and they were so afraid. Some of them were crying. Some of them asked me as a foreign correspondent, can I embrace you? We are happy that you are here, but we are so afraid that the army would come and we know how this would end. And now more than 7 years have passed and those 7-year-old wounds will not heal until justice will be delivered to the victims. But now with Prayut Chan-o-cha junta chief, who was deputy army chief back then in spring 2010, I think national reconciliation and justice will be more remote than ever before. And after July 2011, when Pheu Thai Party won the elections in a landslide, and Yingluck Shinawatra became Thailand's first female prime minister, so the military and the conservative elites again forged plans to oust the democratically elected government. And I visited the protest sites of the PDRC back then very often. I walking along with them to the streets, interviewed people several times, and during that time, we saw a further destruction of democracy. So when the PDRC created chaos, confusion, sabotaged the elections on 2nd February 2014, demanded an unelected People's Council, and for the army to intervene, which the military finally did. So I would like to talk now about the situation in today's Thailand. Since the coup, the situation in Thailand deteriorated, particularly the human rights situation, while the generals of the NCPO seek to entrench their rule in the long term by fear, suppression, a controversial constitution, and last but not least, by the increased abuse of the draconian lèse-majesté law. Since the generals consider themselves as guardians of the monarchy, they have now to protect a king who is loathed and despised, even among royalists, and so they have to abuse the law harsher than ever to stifle dissent and criticism. The official figures regarding the rising number of lèse-majesté cases speak volumes. In early May, the International Federation for Human Rights in Paris and two of its partner organizations in Bangkok reported that the number of individuals arrested on lèse-majesté charges since the May 2014 military coup has passed the 100 mark. 49 of them have been sentenced to prison terms of up to 30 years. And just recently we had a case 2 weeks ago where a Thai man was jailed, was handed down a sentence for 35 years, and this sentence had only been reduced. Originally it had been 70 years, only reduced because he pleaded guilty. So up to that date, at least 64 individuals are either imprisoned or detained, awaiting trial on lèse-majesté charges. Our topic is Thailand towards absolutism, and the debates are about who is in charge, the military or the king, or both of them, because they rely heavily on each other. We will discuss how to assess recent developments and if there were acts of interfering by Vajiralongkorn that could be seen as a royal meddling, of a power-hungry king who is wresting power from a junta, or just the contrary, and my fellow panelists Andrew and Giles will elaborate further on that. So my own theory is, if Vajiralongkorn really is considered an increasingly absolute monarch, that would mean he needs to invest continuous time and efforts to maintain its status. And the question is whether he would be doing so in the long term, apart from demanding changes to the controversial constitution. These efforts would become so energy consuming that Vajiralongkorn, my guess, would not find sufficient time to live his preferred life abroad in Bavaria, far from his royal duties at home. So let me put it this way. Thailand is moving towards absolutism, since the ruling junta is in a partnership of convenience with the new king. And the both of them are suppressing the Thai electorate unprecedentedly and ordering the people at gunpoint to obey. But this relationship, or this partnership of convenience, is an unpredictable one, as there are moments when the junta was completely taken by surprise by some of Vajiralongkorn's reactions, and we do not know how this relationship will unfold further. For instance, when Vajiralongkorn initially refused to sign the constitution and demanded changes regarding the authority of the monarchy, the royal household, Junta Chief Prayut agreed, since the military needed Vajiralongkorn's signature to enforce the military-forged constitution. As I said, both sides need each other, since the military derives its legitimacy to stage coups and to consolidate its power by portraying itself as a protector, the guardian of the monarchy. and while the king would need the junta to uphold the status quo which no one is allowed to challenge. However, I believe it is the military that calls the shots. So far the generals tried to tolerate Vajiralongkorn's behavior. They tried so hard to cover up his reputation, not only as a playboy, but also as someone who is considered brutal and cruel, since some of his former allies died under mysterious circumstances. But if there might be a situation that the junta cannot tolerate or cover up anymore, then the army would not hesitate to isolate the king. It's my guess, to purge him, probably. People keep asking whether there is a way to end military rule in Thailand, and I'm afraid there's no easy answer to this. I can imagine that many people were sick and tired of the decade-long yellow and red conflict. Nevertheless, I'm convinced that the majority of the Thai electorate wants democracy, a genuine democracy, as I was told in many interviews. But the question is how to achieve this. The country remains bitterly divided, and even if there would be a popular uprising, as we have seen in October 1973 or in May 1992 or even in 2010, we all know how brutal the army would crack down on pro-democracy protests. And already shortly after the coup, when I was doing interviews, a lot of people already told me that they believed that there won't be any elections in Thailand for a long time, even before the junta delayed elections over and over again. So getting rid of absolutism in Thailand might take a long time. And as the last 85 years have shown, and there are movements, of course, aiming to establish a Thai republic, consider the monarchy the key problem, and they seek to abolish both the monarchy and the lèse-majesté law. In the foreseeable future, I'm afraid, we will see more political conflict and further bloodshed, since the junta, the palace, and the whole conservative establishment will not give up power voluntarily and peacefully. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Blow-by-blow account and also interesting analysis of the partnership with convenience. That sets the stage for the next two speakers. And thanks for sticking to the time. Before Andrew starts, any direct questions for Nicola? The debate will...
Okay, thank you. So thank you all so much for coming on this 85th anniversary of the revolution in Thailand. I'm sure most of you have probably seen news from today that Ungpakorn, an activist who was formerly jailed, he tried to take a replica plaque, just put it back in Royal Plaza, and he's being carried away by the junta. He's been detained. This kind of extraordinary situation where the King of Thailand can organize the theft of a historical relic in the middle of the night. Everybody knows that he did it. And when an activist merely just tries to take a replica plaque back there, they get detained. We also know that Thai academics who are marking today in various places in Thailand have been visited by police and told they can't mention the theft of the plaque. It's an extraordinary thing. And the whole incident, I think, it really shows that under the new king and his allies in the military, they're really waging, it was a declaration of war on democracy when the king ordered the removal of the plaque. And we're also seeing, it's almost a war on history. They're trying to turn back time. And we're seeing a war on honesty and war on truth, because you're not even allowed to mention these things anymore. And this is an issue that has been ongoing in Thailand, as Nicola was saying, for many years. Many of the people in this room are unable to go to Thailand anymore because we just try to speak our minds and we try to report what's really happening. And I think it's become clear that for journalists and academics, it's becoming exceptionally difficult to stay in Thailand and still do your job, because I was based in Thailand in 2000 to 2002 for Reuters, and at that time, Bhumibol had retired to Hua Hin, Thaksin was just rising. The monarchy didn't really seem to be that central to Thai politics, and I think it was fine to be a journalist and report what was happening in Thailand without, having to mention the monarchy. But nowadays, and especially with following the succession, I don't think you can, as a journalist or an academic, you can really give a sensible account of what's happening in contemporary Thailand without saying things that are illegal. It's really become impossible to do your job honestly and, without breaking the law. So this is a dilemma that I faced, that Giles has faced, that Nicola has faced, and many others, is that you can't tell the truth in Thailand without breaking the law. And that takes us back to Ekachai, who was detained today because Ekachai's trial, that he was officially put on trial for distributing some books and some CDs with WikiLeaks cables, in which Prem Tumsulan, the head of the Privy Council, and Anand Panyorachun and Sidi Satsila, they all discussed the suitability of the Crown Prince, or the unsuitability of the Crown Prince to become king. And Ekachai's legal team tried to summon these venerable statesmen to come to just confirm actually the WikiLeaks cable just confirmed what they said was true. And the judge in the case said, well, the truth won't help you, because lèse majesté is not about truth. It's about, even if you say something true that insults the monarchy, you go to jail. Now, so this puts us in an extraordinary situation, because as we know, the new king has a lot of strange, and he has a lot of personality disorders, and he behaves in a very strange way. Most seriously, of course, we know he's behind several murders. 3 people in his inner circle died in 2015. In the previous year, a senior policeman was thrown out of a window during interrogation. Jumpon Manmai, who was one of the king's key lieutenants, he's disappeared again into a secret prison that we now know, thanks to the work of Ajahn Somsak and Ajahn Pavin. We're learning a lot about this secret prison. Jumpon disappeared back into the prison. We don't know if he's alive or dead. He hasn't been heard from for some time. We also are starting to get information about the king's mistreatment of his former wife, Surat. It was widely known that after he divorced her, he jailed most of her family, including her parents and her 3 brothers and her uncle, Kongpat, who ran this criminal network. But what's less widely known, but starting to come out, is that we believe that Srilat is facing ongoing mistreatment, and the king seems very sensitive about anyone finding out about this. And there's also the issue, of course, about his taste in strange clothes, and he enjoys doing that in public. Sometimes he enjoys public nudism, he enjoys going out wearing crop tops and fake tattoos. And there's nothing really wrong with that behavior compared to everything else that he does. I think it's his right to go out in public wearing whatever he chooses or whatever he does not choose. But the 2 key points with this, which is why I focus on it and why it's important. The first is that, whatever the king is doing with various women in his life and his dressing up and so on, that kind of behavior should be done among consenting adults. And when it comes to the king, the question of consent is missing, because he can enforce his will, and he has always done this. Throughout his life, he's continually, demanded that women serve him and so on. So there's no consent. And secondly, we're in this peculiar paradox that the person who's committing lèse majesté on the biggest scale nowadays is not Somsak or me or Giles anymore, it's the king himself. By the king's own behavior, by going out, dressed in peculiar ways that shock many Thais, he's breaking lèse majesté law. And just a video showing him walking around is banned by the Thai authorities. So it's kind of an extraordinary situation. Back in July last year, when Built magazine published the first tattoo photographs, and I shared them, and my wife ended up being arrested and had to escape Thailand. There was some discussion online on Reddit about the lèse-majesté law and about the photographs. And somebody pointed out that you can't share these photographs, you can't talk about the king's dress sense because it's against the law in Thailand, but it's very strict lèse-majesté law. And one of the best comments I've seen in the past few years from anybody on Thailand was on this Reddit discussion where somebody said, it's almost like they're deliberately making it hard for people to follow that law. Because the king by his own actions is behaving in an extraordinary way. So we're in this peculiar situation where the junta seems to have decided to try to stick with the king, stick with the monarchy. And I agree with Nicola, and I mean Nicola and Giles, and especially Giles and I and others, we often debate amongst ourselves and disagree about who's really in charge. Is it the king? Is it the military? Who's the most powerful? And actually, I mean, it's often assumed that because I thought the royal succession was very significant, I think the king's the most powerful, but in fact I don't. And certainly during Bhumibhol's reign, I actually mostly agree with Giles' assessment that Bhumibol was a weak monarch and a puppet. He wasn't really in command, and The King Never Smiles by Paul Handley is a wonderful book, but to me the mistake it makes is that it portrays Bhumibol as this genius who's pulling all the strings and controlling everything. And in my reading of his reign, he's more like this kind of Forrest Gump style character who was being manipulated by others and was present at all these key events in Thai history, but didn't really take charge. But now we're seeing something different. We're seeing the new king behaving with extraordinary audacity. Everybody expected that because he's so reviled, he wouldn't really be able to maintain this kind of royal cult that Bhumibol did. So everybody expected that the power of the monarchy would shrink after he became, after succession. But instead, he's determined to actually try and increase the power of the monarchy. And I think that's something that's captured in the title of our discussion today, Thailand Towards Absolutism. Along with the removal of the plaque and other issues, we're seeing deliberate efforts by the monarchy to increase its power. And I think that's actually quite unprecedented. All Europe political society has been unprecedented in the modern world for a monarchy to be doing that. Usually as countries develop and become more wealthy and better educated, you tend to see these old power structures reducing in power. And we're seeing the opposite in Thailand. So, whatever you think about how much power the king really has, he is clearly trying to impose himself in a quite unprecedented way. And nobody's stopping him so far. Now, I agree with Nicola's assessment. I agree that really the king has no power without the junta and without the military and without the elite. And most of them hate him, and they're having a nightmare. It must be one of the worst jobs in the world to be private or to be one of the king's inner circle, who constantly, at risk of being, facing violence, being criticised, being flung in their secret prison, and so on. And you would expect that sooner or later something would happen, and they would remove their support for him and try and find a way to move forward in Thailand without the monarchy. But so far they've totally failed to do so. Nicola's already mentioned the extraordinary story of the Constitution, where this was, a referendum was held with a huge amount of, publicity, but of course no one was allowed to actually debate the demerits of the new Constitution. The referendum was held to give this Constitution a veneer of legitimacy and democracy. Then once the new king came into power, he didn't like it because it reduced his own personal power, so he demanded that it be changed. First of all, because he wants to be able to live for most of his time in Germany without having to have a regent. And secondly, because there'd been an attempt by many of the elite to formalise a role for the constitutional court and others, rather than having the king being the one, the last arbiter when there's a crisis. And he refused that. He wanted to remain the arbiter of last resort. So it's an extraordinary attempt, a very audacious attempt, whatever you think of him, by the king to impose himself and try and drag Thailand back towards the past. And, you know, it's symbolized by the fact that he ordered the removal of this plaque, and we all know he ordered its removal. He's trying to turn back history to before 1932. And what's extraordinary is that he's been mostly allowed to do it by the junta, who could, if they wanted, or the military, they could, if they wanted, you know, push him aside, by the Thai elite, who mostly hate him. I got a lot of complaints from some of my Thai sources last week, because on June 9, they held a 4-hour-long ceremony for memorial ceremony for King Anant, the Rama VIII, who died. It was the anniversary of his death. And usually when the Thai elite went to ceremonies like this in Pumipons, right, and they sat in nice chairs, they had air conditioning, but the new king is actually enforcing this culture of prostration and submission. So a lot of senior sources are complaining that even top-level diplomats, even top officials are having to crawl on the ground in front of them. And in this ceremony, they all had to wear their full white dress uniform and sit on the ground for 4 hours in the heat. Prem got a chair, and Prior got a chair, and Privy Council, and they had little air conditioning units, and everybody else had to sit on the floor. And they were miserable, they hated it, and many of them complained to me. And of course, the obvious response is, well, it serves them right. You know, these are the people, these are the Thai elites who failed to stop the king, who allowed this bizarre culture of veneration of monarchy to evolve. And now they're facing this reign of terror where they're very worried about what might happen. They have to sit on the floor in the heat, they have to prostrate themselves, and yeah, you know, it serves them right. And so far they seem to be doing it. And if we want to ask, you know, why? Normally, if the country's military and elite were subject to so many humiliations, personal humiliations, which powerful people hate, and the king is so clearly a disastrous figurehead because of his behavior, why do they still stick with him? It's a mystery, and I think Giles probably has some different opinions on this. But to me, I blame Thailand. I blame this culture that was fostered by the elite over several centuries or several decades, that it became normal for people not to think for themselves, to be submissive, to have to crawl on the ground. And it was claimed that this is Thai culture. It's not. It's not. Nothing innate in Thais to make them have to crawl on the ground and follow orders. It's something that became, I think, inculcated over the decades, and the elite themselves became a victim of it, and now they don't know what to do. So if you look at people like Prayut or senior politicians and so on, they're people that need someone to give them orders. They're not able to really think for themselves. And Thailand, I think, is really what's been holding Thailand back and is leading us towards this political crisis. The last point I want to make, and a more positive point, is that I think Thailand is dying. Thanks to the internet, thanks to the behavior of the monarchy, and thanks to the fact that, you know, a lot of younger people are no longer accepting it. So we've seen some very interesting phenomenon where, you know, for example, a flight attendant was forced to prostrate on the ground, or somebody was forced by an official after a parking accident to prostrate, and people filmed it or reported it, and it caused a huge backlash. And to me, what I'm positive about is when I meet younger Thais, many of them, they don't follow this culture. They reject it. And, you know, I think we're seeing Thailand imploding by itself, because it's very difficult to see where the junta and the monarchy will go. They still don't know if they're going to have elections next year. They've committed to it, but from latest information I have, there's still internal debate. And it's very possible they'll be delayed again, either because the death of the Queen will be engineered, or because there'll be more bomb attacks, or so on, and election will be delayed again. There seems to be an internal debate inside the elite and the junta about what to do. If they have elections, it's very unclear how the government can function with any kind of democracy. We know the new constitution is very undemocratic. It's designed to create a fake democracy. give the facade of democracy without people having real rights. But, what are the junta going to do? What's the military going to do and the king going to do when people are allowed to congregate in groups of more than 5 people and protest, when people are going to start making peaceful protests? They can't cope with these kind of things, and it drives the king into a rage. And so, when I read media reports, the media that remain within Thailand about the reign of the new king, they often say, well, it's gone remarkably smoothly, everything seems to be fine and there's no real dissent. I think that misses the point. This is because Thailand is in lockdown. And that's the only way that this situation is being able to continue. And the junta have put themselves in a position that, how do they transition back even to a semi-fake democracy? Because they have to allow people freedoms that could bring everything down. So we also have a situation where King Vajiralongkorn is probably the last king of Thailand, because who will follow him? We might have a queen next, because if he dies or if he abdicates, it's likely his eldest daughter might become the next monarch. We only know of one son still in the line of succession, Dippengorn, who doesn't seem well enough to reign. It's unclear, there's rumours that he has children with his new wife Nui, but I'm sceptical because we've never seen them. We often see the king boarding a flight in Munich with Nui and with Doi and others. We've never seen any infants on the flight. So the Thai monarchy is kind of dying, and Thai-ness is dying, and I think military rule in Thailand is dying, and that's why it's so vicious and so strong at the moment, because I think people understand that their days are over and a new Thailand is emerging, and that's why they're desperately clinging on so hard. So it's a grim situation now for all of us who love Thailand, love Thai democracy, but I do think we're living through the end days of the old regime, and I think things will, I hope, improve. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. So Thailand is dying, the military is dying, and the monarchy is dying, so there's a new Thailand emerging. Quick questions for Andrew, or should we let Jai hear them? Jai's responding.
As Nicola mentioned, a man called Wichai was sentenced to 35 years for a Facebook post. And the question is, who ordered it? Was it the king or the military? And who is being protected by the lèse-majesté law? The same week that Wichai was sentenced to 35 years, a man was sentenced to death in Pakistan for blasphemy on Facebook. Now, I think it's worth comparing these two issues. But first I want to say that in recent days, British politics have been very, very interesting. And the British media reported that Theresa May asked permission of the Queen to form a government. Now, imagine if the Queen had said no. Imagine the constitutional crisis that would have taken place. And yet the British media still said that she asked permission. I would say that it's not very different from Thailand. Now, Andrew's mentioned WikiLeaks. WikiLeaks, when they were talking about, when the members of the Privy Council, high-up generals, were talking to the American ambassador about Vajiralongkorn, they showed utter contempt for Vajiralongkorn. So why on earth would they let Vajiralongkorn order them about? Now, I think that this needs to be taken into account. Now, coming back to Wichai and the Pakistani man who was sentenced to death or long-term imprisonment for either blaspheming against God or blaspheming against the king, the Thai king is built up as a semi-god. When people are jailed for blasphemy, in Pakistan or wherever. The question is, did God order it? Now, I don't believe in God, so he didn't order it as far as I'm concerned. Who ordered it then? And why did they order it? The Pakistani ruling class ordered it because Islam is used, like all religions, in order to protect the status quo. It's also used by people protesting against the status quo as well. That's the nature of religion. But, you know, that indicates to me that what you see in Thailand is that Vajiralongkorn is being used as some kind of god with absolutely no power, and his protection is really the protection of the ruling class and the junta, the people that hold state power. Now, I must really protest to Andrew about this use of Thainess. I mean, I've read about Western academics and commentators who wrote back in the 1960s and 1950s about Thainess. Now, Thai people, Ratsanuk, you know, they don't take anything seriously. They're always smiling. They can't think for themselves. What an insult. What an absolute insult. You know, the history of Thailand, and it's the 85th anniversary of the revolution, is marked by uprisings against the ruling elite. 1932, 1973, 1976, the civil war with the Communist Party, 1992, and the Red Shirt uprising. All these people thought for themselves. And you should go back and read the literature at the time, for example, writings by Gulab Saibradin about how people were thinking at the time. Now, rather than discussing the king too much, I think we should look at the military constitution. The military constitution has a 3-page prologue. Of course, naturally, it praises Generalissimo Prayut, His Highness and Excellency. It also talks about Thai-style democracy, which, if you want to put it in another context, is not really Thai-style. I mean, that kind of democracy was invented by lots of different people in Indonesia. It was called guided democracy. So you get to vote a bit, and then but the people in power still stay in power and still dictate what's going on. And I'm going to elaborate a bit about this later. But the funny thing about the Constitution also is that it has a blatant lie in it saying that King Ram VII, you know, the guy who was overthrown by a revolution, actually gave democracy to the Thai people. Well, I'm waiting for a monument of King George to be built outside the US Senate, you know, by the way that King Ram VII's monument is outside the Thai Parliament. My two arguments about Thai politics for this meeting are: one, if it is towards absolutism where we're going, it's absolutism of the military, not the monarchy. And secondly, the monarchy has no independent power. It's a tool of the military. And under Vajiralongkorn is even more the case. The guy is a half-wit. You know, he doesn't know how to behave. He isn't interested in politics and economics. Why would he need any power? How could he obtain that power? Now, I think that you have to look at the constitutional amendments that he insisted upon. They were only constitutional amendments which affected the running of the palace. They weren't constitutional amendments about anything else. The mistreatment of individuals, terrible that it is, are only mistreatment of people in his circle. Now, if you want to understand the relationship between the military and Vajiralongkorn, I don't think it's necessarily a sort of relationship of convenience. It's more like someone holding a very vicious dog by the lead. The military holding Ungpakorn, the dog, by the lead. Now, if you want to use the dog for whatever purpose, you have to let it out a bit. You have to give it some food, you know, so that it does what you say. And this is why Ungpakorn is allowed certain privileges to do what he wants to do in his weird and distorted manner. Otherwise, he'd just say, well, tough, I'm going to stay in Germany. What are you going to do? So, you know, that, I think, explains Ungpakorn's behavior. Now, before Ungpakorn, Ungpakorn, as I have often said, was a cowardly puppet who was placed in position and promoted and so on by the military ever since the Ungpakorn always went with the flow. His statements were always abstract and mumbling statements. He couldn't really string more than 2 or 3 sentences together properly. And you could interpret it in different ways. Now, I'm sure people here are aware of how people argue about the contents of the Bible. You know? It's often contradictory. It's believed by some to be the Word of God, and yet you can argue about it. Well, exactly the same thing happens with whatever Ungpakorn had to say. Because he used to praise Thaksin, but then whoever didn't like Thaksin would say, yes, but in this sentence he criticized Thaksin. Now, if we're going to argue that Ungpakorn is somehow got power, how did he get it? I mean, it's not something you go and buy in a supermarket. He doesn't have any. Well, he probably has a collection of guns. The guy's an idiot and a vicious one at that. But the number of guns he has doesn't compare with the number of guns that the military has. The other way you can get power in society is by having legitimacy and having public support. But he doesn't have that either. So where does this so-called power come from? Power isn't something, you know, that doesn't have any concrete meaning. But let's get back to the 1932 revolution. Now, if some people are going to suggest that we might be moving towards royal absolutism, I think it's worth going back in history. Because after the 1932 revolution, there was a royalist uprising, what's called the Rebellion. This was crushed by the people's power in alliance with some mass movements. For example, trade unionists joined the fight against Bowaradeh. It was crushed in 1933. And historians like Thongchai Minichkun say that the royalists gave up, and the monarchy gave up any thought of returning to royal absolutism at that point. All they wanted after that was some role for the monarchy. Now, the military and the elites who are in power, who came to power after 1932, are hardly likely to want to give up their power to the monarchy. They don't even respect the monarchy, this present monarchy. So I think that that's something to bear in mind. Why should the generals who are now in charge say, oh, all right then, you can have our power. I mean, why did they bother staging the coup in the first place? Why did they bother staging numerous coups in the first place? The second point about 1932 is that it was a revolution. If you read a lot of books in English and some in Thai, it makes out that it's a coup. A coup, in other words, supported by a handful of people, most of them educated abroad, with non-Thai-ness ideas. Rubbish. Bridi Panomyong, the leader of the 1932 revolution, said that most people, well, first of all, he said when he went to study in France and he came back to Thailand, he discovered that ordinary Thai people were hating the monarchy. And most people involved in the 1932 revolution weren't actually educated abroad. And there is a lot of work done by the historian Nakarin MacGregor that points out that the 1932 revolution was supported, physically supported, also supported in terms of ideas by a lot of people. For example, farmers writing to complain about the royal government and so on. So it was a mass movement. It's not something that most Thais ignored. It's not the case at all. Now there's another issue about 1932 that we need to discuss, and that is the idea that somehow it's unfinished. Now there are two ways you can look at this. Either it's unfinished in terms of it being a bourgeois revolution, a revolution that paves the way to capitalism and modernism, or it's unfinished in terms of being a democratic process. Now, obviously, we don't have democracy in Thailand, but it's important to look at the idea that it's somehow an unfinished revolution, that Thailand never had a bourgeois revolution, the kind of revolution they had in France, the kind of revolution they had in Britain, and so on. And this is something that's still believed by people like Seksan Prasekun in his most recent speech. This is actually an idea that comes out of the Communist Party, Stalinism, Stalinist stages theory. It says that you need a popular front, you need to unite with all forces, including the capitalist parties. You need to delay the demand for socialism because countries like Thailand or Indonesia or wherever these communist parties exist claim that a proper capitalist or bourgeois revolution never took place. Well, it's not true. Feudalism in Thailand was abolished at the time of King Rama V's revolution. He abolished all forms of feudalism. It wasn't done overnight, but it was finally abolished. And so the absolute monarchy that King Rama V installed in the 1870s was actually a capitalist state run by an absolute monarchy. It was a bourgeois revolution from above. You may think that's a very strange concept, but it isn't, because if you look at Japan, the Meiji Restoration was also a revolution staged from above in order to compete with Western powers and bring about nation building. And you can read about things that King Rama V did in works by Kulada Gedwuntumi and Chayan Ratchagun. So the failure of the 1932 revolution was really a failure to establish stable democracy. It did abolish the absolute monarchy. And I put this down to Bridi Panomyong's lack of understanding of the need to build a mass political party and therefore relying too much on the military. Bridi himself once wrote, "When I had the power, I didn't fully understand politics. Once I lost my power, I began to understand politics." And I think that really sums him up, very courageous and honest man. Now, let's talk about the military constitution towards absolutism. The junta has initiated what's called a national political strategy, and this will be set in stone for decades. It allows unelected bodies powers to veto any decision made by elected governments in the future. This is the key thing that will continue the influence of the military and the conservatives. Article 5 gives special powers to groups of political leaders to determine the future of the country in times of crisis. Well, everyone can argue there's a time of crisis as an excuse. The Prime Minister can be a non-MP under certain circumstances. The military has powers to appoint the all-powerful Senate, and the Senate can veto government policy. The Senate has extensive powers to appoint the Electoral Commission, the Anti-Corruption Commission, and the constitutional judges. And you know what these so-called independent, well, not independent, bodies did in order to undermine recent elected governments. The Electoral Commission can also vet manifestos of political parties so that they conform to the national political strategy. So you couldn't have a political party in Thailand in the next election that said in its manifesto, we want to bring about a welfare state by taxing the rich. No, 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 no. It would be vetted out and not allowed by the Electoral Commission. The constitutional judges can dismiss elected governments if they act against political strategy. The method of calculating members of parliament favours the military-aligned Democrat Party. It's almost impossible to amend this constitution. But of course it is possible if you have an uprising. I mean, the military have torn out numerous constitutions, so if they can do it, we can do it. And it specifically outlaws what I call reactionaries when they use the term populist policies. Like, now I'm no supporter of Thaksin, but you know, people talk in contemptuous terms about, oh, his populist policies, universal health care. You know, that's buying votes. Money to villages to create jobs. That's just buying votes. You know, now the people that don't like populist policies don't think that the majority of the population deserve the right to vote. They think they're too stupid. They think that the population should like austerity, should like having to pay to go to hospital for the good of the country. So this has been outlawed by the Constitution, and the Constitution also enshrines extreme neoliberal policies in the interests of the rich. Article 47 destroys the concept of universal health care, saying that the government only has duty to provide for the very poor. And right now, at this very moment, there is a battle going on in Thailand about the draft law going through about the universal healthcare system, with protests against it, against the draft law, which shows that protests actually can take place and do have an effect. Article 54 cuts the free education in the final years of secondary school. That's what Thailand is moving towards. And supposedly this constitution has passed, and yet we still see the use of the I say so, Article 44. Whatever Prayut says is law. So he's ruling by decree at the moment. Well, he was ruling by decree before, but he was pretending to pass it through the rubber stamp military-appointed parliament. Now, I've outlined a lot of things that show that Thailand is moving towards a system of guided democracy enshrined in the military constitution. There are issues, all sorts of political issues, social issues, economic issues. Vajiralongkorn has absolutely no opinion about this. None at all. Now, someone, as Nicola would point out, someone who wanted to rule Thailand would have an opinion about politics and economics and social issues. He's actually too busy on his bicycle being shot at by little boys. And the junta actually are very happy for him to spend a lot of time in Germany. Why? Because if he spent a lot of time in Thailand, people would, you know, it would be difficult to cover it over. You know, that would be what it was like if Vajiralongkorn was in Thailand. But if he's in Germany, well, it's a bit further away. Now, people have said, why can't the junta get rid of the king? The junta can't get rid of the king, and they couldn't put his sister in place because it would completely destroy the myth of the monarchy. There's all this myth about how the Thai monarchy, none of it's true, but it's what they want us to believe, that the monarchy is an ancient institution from way back in Sukhothai. Absolute nonsense. But they can't do that, because if they do that, they will destroy their own legitimacy. The military have only one single legitimacy. They can't claim democracy as a legitimizing thing, and that's very important in Thailand. They can only claim the royal, protecting the royal family. I don't believe Vajiralongkorn ordered the removal of the plaque. I don't even think he knew about it, or even cared about it. He probably has some vague idea about what 1932 was like. He's more interested in what he's doing, with his women and his bicycles and his palace in Germany. So what is to be done? First of all, I would argue, let's avoid being sidetracked by focusing on the king. What happens when you focus on the king? Is that a step forward towards overthrowing the military and bringing about democracy? No, it isn't. Why? Because you can't talk about the king, so you can't do anything. There's nothing you can do. It's a formula for passivity. Yes, it's useful to share pictures of Vajiralongkorn's weird behaviour, like Andrew's done. That's useful because it actually destroys the legitimacy of the monarchy. But apart from that, what we really need is a mass social movement. We need political organisation to struggle against the military dictatorship and its legacy after they call sham elections. And this has been done before in Thailand. 14th of October, Communist Party, 1992, and all around the world. Authoritarian regimes have been overthrown by mass movements. Will that mass movement come from the red shirts? Or will it come from Pheu Thai? I don't think so. I think the red shirts are finished. I think that Thaksin and his allies have actually destroyed the movement by putting it into deep freeze. Will this mass movement come from the small student groups? Unfortunately, no. They may well be small acorns that grow into bigger trees later on, or they won't be sparks. But the small student groups that protest are not interested in building mass movements. Some of them even say it's enough just to rely on social media. And I think they're wrong. So we need a mass movement. It's not going to be easy to build. It takes time. But unless we get a mass movement to overthrow the military and to install real democracy, we won't see the completion of 1932 in terms of being a democratic revolution. Thanks.
And questions, different opinions, same opinions. Knock yourself out.
It's probably worth adding, we're not going to film anybody asking questions, so it's safe to ask a question, because obviously it is a concern for those people who are here who still live in Thailand that you're at this event. So you're safe to ask a question without being on camera.
Since I'm going to talk about some of this issue in my afternoon session, I've tried to be brief here, but I feel that I cannot let this go without commenting. The issue of who have the most power between the military and the monarchy. it's come down to, this is what I said last year in Paris, that it come down to how you define power. And the thing that troubled me, and I think it's quite wrong, is that you all, three of you, if I may say this, I think that you define power in the kind of utilitarian instrumentalist way or modern rationalist way. Power means you order this A person to do this B thing, C thing, D thing. It has to be something that very concrete, like order this to change this or do that. And once you define power like this, you end up saying that the monarchy had no power, or either Ungpakorn is just a puppet, right? And to pick up what Nicola said, that the alliance between the military and the army just, oh, by the way, the funny thing is that Ungpakorn probably never had that kind of power, or never at least exercised that kind of power, but his son actually did. His son actually ordered somebody to do this or this. But Ungpakorn rarely, I studied him for years, for decades, he rarely used that kind of power. You could say that he didn't have that kind of power, and I would totally agree. But it depends on how you define power. If you define power that way, you would end up like Ungpakorn have no power at all. The monarchy have no power, and the monarchy have power. To use our Nicola and use the word of convenient, right? So the partnership of convenient, and Andrew said even Ungpakorn is just a kind of puppet for the elite, right? One of the key idea in Andrew's book, which I think most of the people don't pick up. Most of the people, I think, read his book, read his work, and thought that he must be opposite of Giles in the sense that he's think that the monarch Ungpakorn has a very much power. But actually, I'm glad that you spelled it out today. But that is the point that I think is wrong. And in the book, you said the loyalists didn't actually loyal to Ungpakorn. They just used him, right? And so the whole book implied that you expect even Ungpakorn wasn't loved by the loyalists. His son would finish, and you expect this kind of war of succession all the time. But it turned out that it didn't happen. The elite happily let his son, this guy, become king, right? And so you end up in the end trying to explain how on earth people tolerate him. All this came down to the very idea, the very core idea that I challenge, that you all define power very narrowly. And to put it in a more leftist language, you all underestimate the power of ideology, the power of system of thought. You grew up in modern Western country, which this kind of thinking has long gone for a century. And you don't quite understand how people would love someone, how people would love this guy, how people would loyal to him and would feel that they could die for him, literally. Of course, in actual history, modern history, not many people die for Ungpakorn really, right? But they put others to die for them, right? But the thing is, if you define power that way, you would say Ungpakorn have no power, the Thai monarchy have no power, and you end up, this is just a puppet. But to come back to Giles finally, there's a sentence that's very striking for me. And it unfortunately, Giles seem not to think of this in the overall framework of this. He mentioned at one sentence, I'm not sure that others can pick up. He said that power came from legitimacy and the support of the people. I totally agree, 100% agree. Power comes from legitimacy and the support of the people. And then I asked, think about this and the whole framework that Giles said, the whole metaphor about God, or the whole example that cite this incident and that incident. This is a kind of example or the kind of thinking that, as I said, instrumentalist utilitarianism, the definition of power. Like power had to be certain A people order certain B people to do certain C or D or E people, right? But come back to that sentence that Giles said, power comes from legitimacy and the support of people. And I ask, over the last century, over the half century, who in Thailand have the most legitimacy and the most support of the people in Thai context? Bhumibol, not by a really long shot. Anybody, no one else can compare to him. Isn't this kind of power? Isn't this the answer that he had the most power? But it's not he in the sense, and I'll talk to this in my session later. It's not actually he in the sense of he himself. It's both sense of he himself as Bhumibol and as he himself as embodiment of something that very bigger. But I think it's totally wrong to think that power have to be defined this way. And then you end up cannot explain a lot of things, a lot of why Bhumibol has such this power, why he can trigger the process of that we call Tulakar Kivat and no one else can.
Okay, thanks very much, Sultan. Please. What do people think? The cameras are all in this direction, so don't be scared.
Are we starting the discussion
Yes.
now? I think I totally agree with that power thing. So this is the first time I have heard that Bhumibol is weak in a puppet. I grew up in Thailand, have Thai education, and I read The Kingdom Was Mine. I think it's a terrific book, and it never came to my mind that he's weak. He's a puppet. Maybe he was weak before he came to power, but then after that he learned that he has power. He learned how to use it, I could believe. And I think at the end he shows that he has the power by several military coups, but he agreed on, at least he did not disagree on military coup. He did not do what he could do, that also a power that he might have, that he didn't stop the coup. He benefited from it. So that would be my comment, that I sort of disagree with the weakness of him.
Thanks very much. Shall we continue this topic a little bit and then move on to other points? What do other people think?
Well, I'll quickly reply, if that's okay. I agree with Ajahn Sopsak that the ideology and the monarchy has become an institution that has enormous power that can be utilized, and I believe that's why Ungpakorn is able to do so now. But as you said yourself, Bhumibol never told people what to do, so I guess you're arguing that he had power, but he never used it. And to me, when I look at Bhumibol, he couldn't even manage his own family. He couldn't control his wife. He couldn't control his kids. So we can see several instances where things that he wanted to happen didn't happen. So this is why I think I agree with you that over time the monarchy built up potential power, which his son is now using in a very obvious way.
Don't you agree with my criticism that, or at least you should try to reply that the whole that you just virtually every incident that you cite, that he ordered this, ordered that, it came down to how do you define power. And you always define power that this way, right? You have to define power that you have to be able to order person A to do specific thing C or D. This is not the kind of power that Bhumibol or the monarchy had at all. The actual historical fact that sometimes he can order something or not order something is not proof at all that he doesn't have power unless you define power very narrowly that way, right? And if you define it narrowly that way, I would agree with this or that incident that he had this power to do this or do that. I would agree. But the whole point of my criticism, which I don't think that anybody could reply really, that you define it, that you have to look at power this way, but why? And if you look at the whole picture of the whole Thai history, why not define power more broadly and look at it this way? And this is how the Thai define power. And to go back to the very sentence that Jai, you like very much. Power come in modern time, not even from the gun. Gun might create power temporarily for a short period of time, but the real power in modern time comes from legitimacy and support from the people. Who else in the past 50 years come close to matching Ungpakorn? No. Not a single person, not a single army chief, not a single, not even Thaksin.
But I think I would like to add something to this. I think we all agree upon that the military derives its legitimacy from the monarchy. Yeah? They have created a myth around Ungpakorn as a loving father of the nation, and no one dared to challenge this. Of course, there are critics, but they're outside the country. And so I would actually would like to go into the direction and would agree with Giles to a certain extent, because Ungpakorn decided to have Vajiralongkorn as his successor. Vajiralongkorn was 20 years old, so it was a long-term decision already. And when Vajiralongkorn was 20 years, and breaking this law, this palace law, or disputing Ungpakorn's decision, the military would never have done that. Yeah? Because then they had to admit that the institution, the palace, the monarchy, is something which is not untouchable anymore, which is something which you can handle anytime you like. Yeah, in a way it fits you.
Well, wasn't that power?
In a sort of ideological power, as you pointed, but it doesn't necessarily contradict Giles' assessment to this. So I think the military deriving legitimacy, and it's all about legitimacy to suppress the people at gunpoint, from deriving this from the power source of the palace, this ideological power. Only if Ungpakorn really, if he really had power, I really disputed this. Yeah, the power came from the old and conservative establishment, the military and the other elites, just came from the palace, because they have to rely on the palace. Yeah. And they are staging coups in the name of the monarchy, saying, oh, the king is so sad, now we have to oust the Thaksin regime. And the king gave his blessing to the coup makers and endorsed the coup in the end. But it was not his decision to stage a coup. Yeah, there are military circles who decided to stage the coup in 2006. And
for him?
For him, in his name.
Yes.
In his name.
Yes.
And in 2014, actually, the king has already
wasn't that power? And in 2014, King Ungpakorn has become already so old and frail and sick, and he wasn't aware of what was going on in Thailand anymore. So yeah, the coup in 2014, it speaks for itself. Yeah, who was responsible for this and who has the real power in Thailand? I don't think really it was Ungpakorn also in the decades before, so it's really I think you.
Let's let Jai respond as well.
Yeah, I just want to point out that I grew up in Thailand and went to Satit Jula, so don't try and claim that I'm a Westerner. I'm both a Westerner and a Thai. That's a rather racist explanation. Now, yes, Somsak talks about abstract power. I talk about concrete power. We can talk about abstract power if you like. We can talk about the power of gnomes and fairies and all sorts of things that are abstract. But real power in society can be proven. Now, yes, power can be derived from legitimacy, or it can be derived from the barrel of a gun and so on. The question is, a table with my mother and father, who were very close to ruling circles in Thailand. We had discussions about politics all the time. And they were of the opinion that Ungpakorn was a weak, characterless puppet of the regime. This is not just my feelings. And the reason for this is that he never stuck his neck out on anything. He didn't dare to. I mean, okay, he was very weak when he first started, when he was on the throne. He wasn't even expecting to be on the throne. Now, this isn't something that Somsak and I would disagree about, because he's talking about a different concept of power. You know, there are powerful systems of thought throughout the world. It's not just a Thai thing. There's a powerful system of thought about the free market, where, you know, it's difficult to argue against the free market unless you get movements in society that confront the issue. You got movements in Thailand that confronted the legitimacy of the king during the communist uprising. You have seen a revision of this during the red shirt movement. But, you know, it's not good enough to just say that there is this airy-fairy sort of powerful thought system. When we debated this in Paris, Somsak asked me to give an example of someone who you couldn't criticize, who seemed to be all-powerful, and I said, God. And that's true. It's a good example. God cannot be criticized in certain circumstances. He can be executed for it. People act in the name of God all the time. It doesn't mean that God is really powerful. So, an ideological thought system, yes, the pro-monarchy ideological thought system has a lot of influence in Thailand, but its influence goes up and down. And actually, I think the person that had more power than Bhumibol at some point in Thai history was Thaksin Shinawatra. But other people who've had more power through other means, not through legitimacy in the ballot box, have been the military.
I think it's clear that there are different sources of power. So, the barrel of the gun, money or capital, and ideology and legitimacy. So, I think any ruling class uses all three sources of power to rule. And so I think that's pretty basic. Yeah.
Actually, I want to kind of look forward a little bit, and it'll be a bit utilitarian this way, because it's interesting that we have the abstract version of power, and of course, for me, I feel like, okay, the monarchy as a system had it, but now when the monarchy changes to this current king, that power is gone. So, or like I feel that it's gone, he doesn't have that cult anymore. So what I'm wondering now is, how does that play out with the utilitarian power that the junta now has, and that it's now using to suppress, you know, pro-democracy discussion in Thailand? Because, of course, even if the people are not happy with the king anymore and they now see him as a person, you still have the actual power of the gun. So how do we go forward from here? What is, you know, where do we go and what's going to happen?
Can I just add a little bit?
Let some other people talk as well.
Yeah. I wanted to make exactly the same point, but also add to that, that what we're now seeing, even though we said that everything the current king has done is only within his circle, but he is exercising these powers more, at least that I'm aware of, more than the last king. So that's quite interesting for me to see how does the junta now, because they're kind of in a difficult situation now. They cannot rely on this demigod anymore because the image is crumbling. But at the same time, the demigod starts to certainly not be a god anymore who can't be criticized and can't be tested, but comes down and is visibly seen exercising the barrel of the gun kind of power by, at the moment, secretly taking people away or making people disappear. But over time, that will not be possible to keep that under wrap anymore. So that's the question.
I think another factor is important is, I think, the time. Right now we can see the power of military very clear, because we're living in the military dictatorship period. Now, if in the future, next year or 5 years from now, there is an election, even though there's a guide, then I'm sure that, you know, the manifestation of ruling class power may or may not show within the military itself, right? So time factor and the period is important. And also, I like the concept of partnership vis-a-vis the who is in control, which is like a black and white, right? And it not necessarily can be shifted, you know, from this side to this side. So it's very important. I think you introduce very important concept in partnership of inconvenience that I think is very useful.
Okay. Anyone else, or shall I get something?
No, I actually not question as such, but I just want to add how important it is to understand Ungpakorn power. If you define it narrowly and notice it, I'm not denying that many instances can be cited that Ungpakorn didn't or couldn't order this or that thing. I never denied it at all. I never reject out of hand this idea of looking at instrumental or specific incident. What I object to is to take this as the whole criteria to define power. My concept of power is actually isn't about abstract or about it all of the thing, but yours is just part of it. And what I would argue is that looking at Ungpakorn power, you have to look at what it actually happened in history, and it support the idea, the point, and it related to the question that some of our friends just asked. The issue of Ungpakorn is so important that our friend asked, is that it look at against this kind of power that the monarchy had, what would happen, and this also that you find it difficult to answer why the junta did what Ungpakorn asked to absent for, which is unprecedented even among tradition of royal family. Is very wrong, but the junta complied. Ungpakorn asked for revision of it, even though it against and the junta complied and so on and so forth. You cannot explain this unless you understand how this kind of power that Ungpakorn built up consists of. Of course, we can discuss it later. How would happen that as our friend just asked this very important question, how would it happen when this guy which have no, everybody hate, how he's still there?
Well, one more point I think is very relevant to this. We're all talking as if the monarchy and the military are two totally separate things, but I think under the new king, we're seeing a merger of the monarchy and the military, in the sense that the king himself is promoting people that he personally likes within the military. At the ceremony where he promulgated the new constitution, which is a very militaristic ceremony, several people pointed out to me that he deliberately asked to be flanked by the army chief and the police chief, and Private was having to face him, and he was flanked by the heads of the army and the police. And this is really a symbol to show that he's saying he has the army with him. He has the police with him. So if we talk about the junta, who's more powerful, the junta and the king, I don't see Private as particularly powerful. He's got to manage a complex organization and lots of different power bases. Same with Private Wongsuan, who was previously the godfather of the junta. And one of the very interesting things we saw in the past few years is that Private was initially the godfather. He was the one that had the power behind the scenes, and power shifted towards Private. So if we talk about, the military as a kind of monolithic institution, I think that's wrong. And I think we're seeing a model now of a militarized monarchy. The king is deliberately doing, he's doing all these military ceremonies every day in the Royal Plaza. All of his staff have to have their own military haircut. He has his own military units under his command. The upcoming army chief is likely to be Apparat from the 1st Infantry, which is a long-standing loyalist. So he's got his own military power base, and I think as we discuss who's really in charge of the military armada, we've got to recognise this. We're seeing the king have military power and military influence by himself, and that's another reason I believe that he's more able to call the shots than the junta, because Raja Somsak is exactly right. His behaviour has shocked and troubled the junta. After they went all the troubles having this fake referendum for them to want to change the constitution, they were horrified by that. They were shocked when they convened parliament on the night that Ungpakorn died, and they were all set to have a special meeting of the National Legislative Assembly, and the king said, "Oh, I'm not ready yet." And they had to they stood in for silence in 9 minutes, and then they all went home. And to me, that's a perfect symbol of the National Legislative Assembly. It was probably the most representative ever meeting. They met, had 9 minutes of silence, and went home again. And so these are things that show the king is powerful, and show that the junta aren't able to stop him, and they're struggling to manage him. But I think we're seeing it's becoming increasingly difficult for that to happen.
Okay, I'd like to maybe focus on less on the kind of personalized sort of analysis of Vaj. But let's talk about 1932, because I think if we have an event on 85 years of 1932, it's actually quite useful to develop a kind of more long-term perspective of how democracy and counter-democratic forces in Thailand developed over time. So the question is, how do we analyze the 1932 revolution? Was it a revolution?
I think the question that to our audience asked earlier, I think it was pursuing what would happen now if this guy, the Vajiralongkorn, who had no one really liked him, and assume this position that it used to have this kind of power. I don't know. I just feel that it's a question that.
Can I say something about this?
Well, I think. Okay, go ahead. But I think we're sort of getting into a kind of rut there. So that's what I think we need to do.
I mean, I think the military are in a difficult position. I think Nicola mentioned this as well. Because the military are used to using the monarchy to legitimize itself. So what can they do? They can't get rid of him, because that would bring the whole legitimacy for the military down. What they can do is hope that he spends as much time as possible in Germany, out of sight. They can also keep the spirit of Ungpakorn alive, and they're doing this with the funeral, and people still wearing black and what have you. They can keep that going for as long as possible, and try to hope that the monarchy becomes something abstract. But will it work? I don't know. I hope it won't work. But I mean, I think that the key question really is, how do we actually struggle towards democracy? What kind of lessons can we learn from Thai history since 1932 about that?
Give this back to your...
Yeah, we might go back to the next round of discussion also among the panelists about the analysis of 1932, because I think this is very pertinent to how we now then analyse the ruling class today. So what actually happened? Was it a bourgeois revolution, or did that already happen before, a bourgeois revolution from above, as Giles was saying? And then what forces do we see in the recent 85 years of Thai history in the ruling class and against the ruling class in Thailand?
I think Giles already mentioned that the 1932 revolution is an unfinished one. And when you are following the events in Thai history, in recent Thai history, you have seen so many uprisings, people really who risked their lives and limbs to fight for democracy. And we have seen it in October 1973, 1976, 1992, 2010 also. And I'm not sure if we will see as I already pointed out briefly, if we might see a popular uprising in the foreseeable future. I'm really not sure about this, because the country remains so bitterly divided. And maybe that we have to wait just for growing dissatisfaction with the military regime to, I don't know, that an uprising can be initiated or launched. But you need also, in my opinion, you might need a political leader, who deserves this name, this characterization, to be a political leader, really fighting for genuine democracy. And the country is so bitterly divided that at the moment I do not see any popular uprising on the horizon. So for the time being, probably, we have to, we are stuck with the military regime, unless something really is happening that the people might rise again, as we have seen in Thai history. But for the moment, I do not see it. And it's really heartbreaking to see that so many pro-democracy protests have been crushed by different military regimes and dictators in the past. So yes, it's an unfinished revolution, and if we might see another round of political conflict coming up in Thailand, then there will be further violence and more bloodshed, because I'm pretty sure the junta and the conservative elites, the palace and all the allies, the old elites of the country, they will not give up their power voluntarily and peacefully. So I'm convinced of this.
I mean, to me, I'm not an expert on history, so but to me the key thing about 1932, and it goes also to Andrew Somsack's point about what is the power of the monarchy. In 1932 there was a revolution which tried to establish a principle that power and sovereignty and legitimacy lie with the people and not with the king. And a large section of Thais have never accepted that. So to me, that's the sense in which it is an unfinished revolution, not necessarily an economic or political economy sense of the end of feudalism and the capitalist economy, but in ideological terms. You would expect, or you might have expected, that it become accepted that power should be with the people, but that's never happened in Thailand completely. Many among the elite are still clearly opposed to it. They've been fighting this idea ever since, and there's this continual idea that politics is a horrible, dirty thing, and politicians are bad, and people shouldn't be able to, uneducated people shouldn't be able to decide for themselves who should govern them, and it should be the enlightened elite and the monarch that do it. So to me, that's the sense that for me, above all, this is an unfinished revolution. It's that 85 years ago was the moment when, in the first declaration of the People's Party, they said, sovereignty lies with the people, not with the king. They talked about the monarchy's bloodsuckers, farming on the backs of the people. And it was an incredible declaration of the rights of people, of popular sovereignty. And it's been fought ever since. So Giles mentioned that the Bordet revolution or attempted revolution was crushed, the royalist counter-revolution. But on a more ideological level, I think we've seen the elite and the military never accept it and continuing to undermine democracy. And it's a process that's still going on today. But I think in the 21st century, with this new monarch, more and more people will not be willing to accept military rule. So just to pick up on what Nicola said, finally, I agree that when we look at Thailand, there seems to be no obvious prospect of political change, no revolution. But I would imagine if I was Priot or one of the junta, I'd be really afraid of the situation. I think that all the conditions are there for there to be change. And when you look at sudden uprisings and revolutions and so on, it often happens very quickly. Something happens that breaks the spell and breaks the fear. And once people suddenly stop being afraid, because let's make no mistake, the junta and the king, they rule by fear. And often there's a small incident that snowballs, and people stop being afraid, and they start protesting, and the courage becomes quite contagious. So I'm hopeful that we might see something happen. We don't know when, but I think all the conditions are there. And we might see something escalating very quickly because, for all their appearance of power, I do think the regime are actually very weak and very unstable.
And if I might add to this, because you mentioned that, and also Giles mentioned the mass movement, because I think it is important to mention that if there might be a popular uprising, it shouldn't be just focused on or concentrated on one political camp, because we have seen this in the last decade. Yeah, when the yellow shirts came out, then after that the red shirts came out, after that yellow shirts came out again after the democratic election. I think it's really important to say there has to be an uprising across different political camps, that people, I don't know, shake hands, join ranks against the junta. But since the country is so bitterly divided right now, I don't see this. But I agree that it should be a mass movement, a mass uprising, to get rid of absolutism or the junta, the military regime in Thailand.
I mean, Andrew said that large sections of Thais never accepted the idea that sovereignty be placed with the people after the 1932 revolution. Well, it's not true. When you look at the work of Nakari and MacGregor, you will see that large sections of the Thai population were totally against the monarchy, partly because of the 1930s economic crisis and how they dealt with it. If you look at the work of anthropologists, they will tell you that in that period, in the countryside, most people weren't really concerned about the monarchy, didn't really care about the monarchy, didn't really know what the monarchy did. So it's an elite ideology fed to us through education in Thailand that somehow all Thais have always revered the monarchy. But of course the elites never accepted the fact that power should be with the people, but the elites in the West have never accepted that. They've grudgingly allowed it to take place because they've been forced to do that. But look at the European Union. Greece voted for anti-austerity, and the European Union officials came and said, no, don't care whether the people of Greece voted for it or not. So it's not just a Thai thing. And look at the recent history of Europe. We've had authoritarian regimes. So it's not about the elites believing in it. It's a question of whether or not people who want to see democracy can actually challenge the authoritarian structures within society. And Nicola's talked about how people rise up on many occasions and many of them lose their lives. And I think it's worth just going through very quickly some of the problems with the uprising. For example, in the 1932 revolution, as I mentioned, there was a lack of properly built mass movement and political party, therefore relied on the military too much. Now, what about 1973 and 1976? Well, there was a mass political party, the Communist Party, and there was an uprising among urban people. But what did the Communist Party say? The Communist Party told its activists to leave Bangkok, to go to the countryside, under a sort of a Maoist program. And this meant that uprisings in the center of power were left on their own. And this meant that you couldn't push the successes forward in 1973, and they were crushed in 1976. Because the Communist Party collapsed in the mid-1980s. You had another uprising in 1992. This meant that people like Damlong Si Muang, a thoroughly reactionary politician, could lead that protest. And who gained from it? The Democrat Party, who didn't even take part in the protest. Now the red shirts staged a mass uprising as well. The problem is they were too close to Thaksin, so they couldn't go beyond what Thaksin wanted. And they relied on static, prolonged protests. A lot of successful protests throughout the world against military regimes have also included strikes. Look at Egypt, although in the end it wasn't successful, but it brought down Mubarak. So for me, the conclusion is that what we need to do is to build an independent mass movement, not hitch it to some big man like Thaksin or somebody else. And we need to take seriously the organisation of workers in Thailand and to bring them into the struggle. And it's not true that workers aren't organised in Thailand. I spent a lot of time among trade unionists in Thailand when I was there, and there are unions there. They're not as strong as I would like to see them, but they are there.
Okay, thanks a lot for that. So next round of discussion, I think we're just debating three points that are interconnected. One is the 1932 revolution. How do we analyze that? How do we understand its significance for today? Secondly, what are the prospects for democracy? Andrew was saying all the conditions are there for a new uprising. Nicola argues that Thailand is too divided for that kind of uprising to happen in the coming months or years. You wouldn't actually say that, but so soon. And Jai gave a kind of analysis of the different uprisings that we had from 1932 onwards and the political problems that we saw with the strategies involved in these uprisings. Which leads to the third point that so the first point is 1932, the second point is the prospects for democratic uprisings or change in Thailand, and the third is then the question of a more detailed discussion of the strategy. So Jai is saying, he's basically criticizing, I think, the political strategy of the Red Shirt movement. He says it was put into deep freeze, and it's problematic to be too close to Thaksin. So that's a third area of debate about the actual strategy and tactics of building a mass movement in Thailand. Your thoughts on that, please? Yes.
I have some observation. I think even though the conditions are there, the conflicts, but why didn't it happen? I think because people still have hope for change in Thailand, and from my observation, I think is that a lot of people still believe in electoral politics. So if there's this thing that, well, there will be election next year or 2 years from now, it's sort of like, that's why when you say, well, we'll give you election, and then people hope that would bring change. Now, let's say that 5 years from now there is no election. I'm sure that we probably have another new analysis, right? So hope play into Thai politics also. I think Thai people still have hope that, well, when the election comes, that's the time. I will tell you, right? So now that's point number one. I think just stop there.
What the young think, and we're saying you are the hopes.
I think it's a bit hard to say that with all the mass movement, uprising or whatever, it's a bit hard to see the goal at the end. I mean, I was born in 1991, so yeah, what can be the end goal of this? Because I've seen uprising but in the end, it just go on and we have another one. So yeah, what can we set as an end goal that we want this uprising to head to? I think that's my point.
If people usually say for democracy, so what's the problem?
The thing is, we can all say that it's for democracy, but it's so abstract. I mean, everyone, even people who support the army right now, who say this is for a greater democracy. But democracy is so abstract, and I think you cannot just go by the headline yeah, we are for democracy. It's
That would have actually been my question for the panel as well, for those who might be more knowledgeable on the 1932 revolution, whether it was a revolution for, I mean, it was a revolution for democracy, yes, but was it for the values of democracy that you could find in a university where people discuss democracy, or were there special interests, so to say, that were kind of driving the change? And if we talk about bourgeois revolution changing it into a capitalist system, which wasn't the case in 1932 because the capitalist system was already introduced, that would have been my question too. What were we actually, or what were they actually fighting for back then, and what were the other uprisings fighting for? Were they really fighting for the ideals or for ideals? Because often mass movements, they do have the ideals in the background, but they're also driven by a certain or by certain pain points that are often, yeah, and that's why things can spread very quickly, based in certain incidents or pain points basically that people feel, okay, now is the time to
just
change.
Just to add, yeah. So what are we fighting for now? And so to overthrow the military, that's fine. But what's going to happen afterward? I think that's, I mean, I'm not very well versed in politics, and most of the time I'm really passive about it because, you know, it's always the same thing every time. So just, yeah.
I guess at the end you want to make a panel like this in Thailand.
Yeah, we're going to jail straight afterwards.
That's what I call democracy.
So I just want to add something, maybe what he has asked. So I think Thai people, or the red shirt people, they still have hope, I think, after the election, that they can move more freely, and to maybe to be able to assemble themselves and to make protests again. I think that's the point, that's what they hope for. And I don't think that they believe that the election will bring something positively in terms of good democracy. You know? And I'm afraid that it could be an illusion, because this army, the government will still control the power, and to keep close eyes on this movement or the leaders, political leaders. So nothing could happen after the election, after the next election, I think. Is that true? What do you think?
So people are kind of hoping that if elections happen, then there'll be more political space to have this kind of meeting again, and then you can start again. And so they're kind of waiting for that to happen before they risk too much.
My second point is, I think the first point is hope, right? I think people still have hope for the future of Thailand. Second point that I want to, from my observation, is that I think right now we see a lot of young people involvement, right? For example, we see in Hong Kong, right? You see, young people come up and directly involved in politics by running for office. I think if Thailand if Thailand wants to change, I think the young not only think just protest and come out and into economic, they have to really embed themselves in the electoral politics, run for office, whether at the local level or national level, or if they have a means, they can form a new party, alternative parties. The more participation in the politics is important, not just build a movement, be an organizer. We have to look beyond that. Those are important. I'm not saying it's not important, but go beyond themselves. Don't criticize that politicians are corrupt. If they're corrupt, why don't you be a good politician? Directly involved in there. Even that would be a good thing, I think.
Okay.
Can I just a little, not really a question, but I just talked to a friend from Thailand about this very point. I just occurred to me that Thailand is against one of the major trends in the world, at least compared to Western countries, right? That is the involvement or coming out of young people, right? We saw this in Sanders, in Corbyn, in even Macron case, in Mélenchon case. In all these cases of Hong Kong, if you include that, people 20, 30 or some even teenager come out and it make a difference, even though they didn't put Sanders as a nominee, that is come quite close, right? Even though, and it have a more than expected result for Corbyn and so on, even Macron or Mélenchon. But during the past 10 years, one thing that always bothered me really is why we haven't seen in this sort of, and you remember Thailand experienced more tension, more crisis than any place out there. I think we could argue that a lot of people dying, a lot of fighting, but let's talk frankly. We saw some of students come out, like people like even maybe with Jan New Rome. We all know this, but they are already minority. To be, and this past 10 years, not in a single university that close to a kind of student movement come out. And if as a context, if we're talking about in Europe or in the West, and I just talked to some friends here yesterday that one thing that very noticeable is that compared to in the 70s, before the 14 October incident, there's a lot of movement among Thai student board in United States, for instance, and there's a lot of Thai activists emerged in the 1970s. And this past 10 years, there are a lot that they feel, I know that lecture movement in US and in Europe too, and US, but almost total silent on among Thai students. Why? How would we explain this sort of phenomenon? And it's so striking. And it's something that I always feel a little strange.
So, I wonder why you are surprised.
Sorry?
I wonder why you are surprised, thinking of the education system in Thailand.
That's a big issue. But on the other hand,
the socialization system in Thailand.
Also, you've got many hundreds of thousands of Facebook followers, right? Most of them are young people. They're debating and interacting. I think this is an amazing thing. I don't think we should underestimate it. There's never been a mass forum for young people to talk like there is on your Facebook page and Facebook, the social media.
No, I don't think that explains it.
So I think this is a useful phenomenon.
The cultural system, the social system in Thailand. Maybe you're going to study to the wrong point. Why do we still have to expect the student to become like the leader of the movement and to become more active? Why we are seeing that now putting privilege to the students as something like the hope of the democratic movement is something that we are going to reproduce the same structure of the culture that we still need someone of the people who are very educative people to become powerful, dominated, to be dominant in the country. This is the thing that happens all the time, and for me, I think that what we need is like a worker rights or the worker movement that should be more seen and visible than today. Today we are going to talk about who are the students, what are they doing. They are not ignoring the problem in the society, but of course what we have seen today is not necessarily the student. Many people in Thailand, they are really ignorant in many parts of the political and social spheres. So, but now what we are focusing now is just only a part of minority of the society, and that's why in the 60s, something like this video, many of the French philosophers, something like this, they try to attack to this point that what are we going to do now? We are going to put the privilege to one group of the people who are called students. Is it the right way of the democratic movement to become the futuristic for the future. And the reason that we have seen that the students are really very passive, very ignorant. I think it's so not so complicated to see that in this actual society. We have seen that the society tends to be more consumerism. How to say consumerism. Wow. Yeah, it's the only kind of thing that try to make the people be happy with the system that bring them or give them their happiness. And people who want to conform to this kind of norm, so they will not come to be aware of what they are now suffering from the mainstream structure, because they are now getting this kind of the tribe or in French it's chantage. And that's why people are now becoming more and more silent. And that's why I'm not wondering that many of the students of this young age, they are now very inactive comparing to the people in that era, in the 60s or in the 70s. We will see that geopolitical reason or factor in that moment, it seems to be more and more tense. And so we cannot compare this era of a really extreme capitalist society to that kind of era. So if we need a real movement right away, we should forget that the student can lead the movement, but it's all the people, ordinary people, and everybody, especially the people who are suppressed by the capitalism. We need to fight together, especially with the workers and those who are now unseen.
Thanks very much. Anyone want to respond to that?
I think Andrew is right to be optimistic about young people, and young people doesn't always mean just students. I mean, there are young workers, there are school kids as well. But Somsak mentioned Neti Witt. Neti Witt has just been elected as to the Council of Chulalongkorn University Student Council. So, I mean, that shows that people are prepared to support him. They know exactly what he stands for, against SOTUS, against the military, against uniforms and so on. So I think that's a little bit of an indication of what's going on. Now, I think the discussion is quite interesting in terms of that. I think it's probably quite a good explanation to say that a lot of people have hope for the elections in the future, and that's why they're not coming out as a mass movement right now. And I think that elections can link into uprisings. For example, if people elect a government and the powers that be say this government can't bring in this and this policy, then people will get angry and might come out to support the government. I think that for mass movements to occur and to be successful, you need splinters at the top. You need pressure from below, causing arguments among the elites, among the military. I'm not convinced that a movement for the future can just be reassembled from the red shirts. I think that the red shirts are finished, but the individuals who formed the red shirt movement could well be involved. Now, there's an important question raised: what is the end goal? Well, I could tell you what my end goal is, and all of you could tell you what your end goals are, and they will all be different. So don't expect one single end goal. It's easier to say we are against this, and this, and unite about it. And then when we've got rid of the military junta, we can carry on an argument about what next. And different people can mobilize for whatever their end goal is. So I think it's unrealistic to say we want an end goal, this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And it's absolutely right that everyone in Thailand claims to be for democracy, even General Bayut.
Great, very interesting debate.
If I can just add a couple of things. We're all talking about uprising, and just to elaborate on some of my earlier points, I think we may not see an uprising, but we're seeing a change happening at the level of attitudes, and that's why we're talking about the young people, about why I think social media and other things are important. And I think you're exactly right, and it's not just in Thailand, all over the world we see revolutions and uprisings, but they don't really change the underlying power structures, and even maybe more importantly, they don't change this underlying culture or fake culture. So education isn't improved. People are still not allowed to debate openly, and so we keep on falling back into the same mistakes, the same situations. And so to me, that's why I think changing attitudes is really important. And I think in the 21st century with mass media and social media and so on, I think revolutions and social change will increasingly happen on that level, and not so much students marching through the capital city or whatever as we had in the past. And if we're all worrying and wondering how are we going to get Thailand more democratic, which can be quite depressing. But if you flip it around and put yourself in the shoes of the junta or the king or the elite, what's their way forward? What's their end game? I can't see it. Attitudes are changing. Thailand's getting wealthier, and at the level of income of Thailand now, it's almost unheard of for a country to regress backwards. And interestingly, we're seeing it in two countries now, Turkey and Thailand, that have both reached a level of wealth we'd expect it to become at least more overtly democratic. And we're seeing it moving backwards. But how long can that be sustained? Because even though economic growth is slow, Thailand is getting richer, the provinces are getting wealthier, the world is getting more interconnected, and how long are Thai parents going to put up with their children having a disgraceful education that leaves them totally unfit for the modern world? Sooner or later, people are not going to accept that, and they're going to demand changes. So even if we don't see an uprising, I think we'll see the regime slowly falling apart because they have no way forward. We know they're going to try to move into this kind of managed guided democracy, as Giles said, where they have fake elections, but the same people are still in charge. We know that the king is going to continue to behave in ways that basically remove or break the spell of the monarchy. There's no real way they can cling to power because unless they try to turn the clock back and put Thailand under a coconut shell, freeze Thailand as many of them want to do, but that doesn't really work. It can't work forever. So sooner or later things will change, possibly quickly by something suddenly happening, but I think if not, it'll happen gradually. And that's my real hope, because I'm already, even in the past decade that I've been focusing on Thailand, I've already seen so much of a change in attitudes, especially amongst young people. I've seen an enormous increase in debate and discussion, ironically because it's banned in Thailand, but we all debate a lot online and so on. And when I look back towards 10 years ago, like I say, I think we often underestimate how far we've come.
Thank you.
Don't you think that, just from my observation, that most Thai people still go by attitudes of what we call in English NIMBY, not in my backyard. So if it doesn't affect their life, their everyday life or anything, it's quite hard for them to gather everything, their heart, their soul, everything to make a movement. You think this trend is going to change at all? For me, I think it's going to stay the same because if it doesn't affect you personally, if your life still goes on, and why you have to change it? That's the attitude that I observe from the Thai culture.
If I may respond to that, because I think that yes, and that's also what I would think that if it doesn't bother me, then why would I be bothered to join an uprising or whatever? But because the world is getting more and more connected, restrictions will bother me more and more. So if the junta decided tomorrow to shut down Facebook because they don't like the whole of Facebook, because they don't like that there's expression that they can't control, people will be super pissed. Not because they don't like the junta per se, or because they want to have democratic values as an abstract form, but because they love Facebook or they love chatting with their friends. Or if they say, well, we're going to shut down a line or whatever service, this will have a huge impact, or even more, other things that restrict you in a way. You don't want those things anymore, and that's.
But that's the thing, though. That's why they're not doing it yet, because I think there's going to be a huge impact. That's why they're going around the corner. So if they decide to just, kind of put it gently, that it doesn't affect your everyday life. You are still able to post your things on Facebook and chat to your friends. So you feel like my life is fine. So I mean, how is it going to change in terms of cultural perception and the society?
I think at the moment the more serious issue is not about this attitude at all, but it's about the polarization. Had there been no polarization, or specifically some of my friends that support Thaksin and Pheu Thai might not like it. Had there been no Thaksin factor, I don't think the junta would go to live any longer much. The one thing that prevent the kind of unified mass movement that cut across the polarization that Nicola talked about, this is one single thing. Really, to be frankly, the thing that people are fed up and dislike the military and sometimes even come out to defend them just because how to prevent the other side to support Thaksin, right? And if I came here, I talked, I think from the very first few months here that I've been here, not here, sorry, in Paris, that the one single issue, nowadays there's no one single person, single organization, single institution, not anything that both sides can agree on, even down to the very trivial issue of this celebrity doing that, this thing. People argue all the time in polar position, and when it comes down to this issue of how to get rid of the junta, it's always come down to this. And this. Sorry, we can talk about more about this in my afternoon session and invite everybody here. And it comes down to back to the issue of how to assess Bhumipol also. I think the other day, Kasian said, and he used this word, and he very good at creating word. He used this word Bhumipol consensus. I only use a kind of consensus or hegemony of Bhumipol, but he nailed it. He used it Bhumipol consensus. The crisis that we witness over 10 years now, and it almost occurs every day, every single day for the past 10 years, almost not a single day that you can pass by the first page of the newspaper without referring something to the crisis. It's extraordinary how it happened. You put 364 plus 10 and you got this every crisis on the front page of virtually almost every day. I can dare you look at the newspaper almost every day. You have to have some sort of sometimes it's big, like in La Pasong case, in this case, but sometimes it's just, but it has to be there, and you wonder how come it possible. And it comes down to this breakdown of Bhumipol consensus. And this, by the way, it shows how important to understand this Bhumipol hegemony or Bhumipol consensus. It's not about his power to order things. It's about the power to hold the society together. And the crisis, the whole crisis, if you come down, you have to nail it. Is that this is the breakdown of Bhumipol consensus, the breakdown of the hegemony that Bhumipol created. And by the way, I cite two issues which is totally irrelevant. One is about the Law 7, about the Lama 7. At the time, nobody even have a dream about Bhumipol. Who Bhumipol? Nobody have even slightly idea Bhumipol would be a king, right? Not to speak of Salit Ira or this sort of thing. And second, if you read what I present, or even not me, Thong Chai, you will see that we carefully suggest that the position that Bhumipol hegemony that created something very recently. It not happened in the 1950 even. With different idea of how to date it. Thong Chai still date it to 1973. I actually date it to the year that a friend just said her birthday, 1991, 1992. This is how I date Bhumipol. But the important thing is to understand this thing that some say is abstract, and to understand that why the crisis is so important, because so far there's this breakdown of consensus and it polarized into two camps, right? And the core is that we don't have this thing that you have to be consensus about. Sure, we now have a winning somewhat because the other side start to speak about how bad Prayut were, right? But they still come down to it. They, deep in my mind, they know that if we overthrow Prayut or Khosachor, the next thing is Thaksin. And this is the problem. And this is also the problem that in the long term, the question of what the uprising want to achieve is also very important. It's not actually it's not a short-term thing overthrow the military, because from my view, and this is what I'm trying to say for quite some time, the problem of finding the new consensus, the new sense of community, the thing that would be replaced Bhumipol consensus.
The Bhumipol consensus only lasted from 1991 to 2002, 10 years.
No, not 2002, later than that.
That's hardly...
Nicola?
I would like to add something very briefly to Ajahn Somsak. I think, yes, to a certain extent, maybe we really have to wait either for a new generation of people and also, on the other hand, for a new thinking. Because it's all about what you mentioned, what will happen after the military rule, the military regime is finished. It's very important in the case of Thailand to see, to wait for people accepting each other, accepting election results, accepting each other's, and also deferring opinion. When I was doing interviews with a lot of people back then, I said just when they were talking of the other side, when the red shirts were talking about the yellows were talking about the red shirts, they just, as if they were talking about the enemy, they're not the enemies, they're both poles of a society, with very differing opinions, of course, but you have to, in a certain way, you have to manage to live with each other, because we're all Thai people, so it's your task, you're thinking, how are you going to work together, how are you going to live together, in a country which belongs to all of you. So this would be my question.
This is what I'm talking about, Bhumipol consensus. This is how, at least for about 20 years or even longer than that, how Thai define themselves. We all children of Bhumipol.
I mean, with Bhumipol gone, I'm starting to think, is Thailand going to be so polarized going forward, especially the younger generation? The reasons for polarization have gone, really, because previously it was really defined about whether you were royalist or pro-Thaksin, but Thaksin's been off the scene, for years now. His power is waning. For young people, he's not this boogeyman figure that he used to be. Bhumipol's gone. Nobody's going to really grow up loving the monarchy anymore. It's just going to get worse, and we're going to have more photos probably shared by me and getting, things like that. So it's getting worse. And my sense from talking to younger Thais, especially, is that they're not particularly polarized anymore, because everybody wants, more freedom. And, nowadays, I think most red shirts and yellow shirts can agree. They want the rule of law. They want, less corruption. They want to have better education for their children, like people all over the world want. And they can't get it under the junta. You have this ridiculous concept of Thailand 4.0, Thailand's going to become more wealthy. It's not. You can't have a knowledge-based economy when people are not forbidden to have any knowledge or discuss things, and you have a terrible education system. So to me, there's going to be, or there already is an emerging consensus about all of this, and it's another reason for hopefulness. And to me, these old arguments, between red shirts and yellow shirts, they're kind of back in history now. You don't really see it, or certainly I don't see it so much anymore, because these are arguments about an era that was over, and the situation is changing.
I think that we're missing the point about the arguments between the red and the yellow. It wasn't about whether they're royalists or not. It's about whether or not you have the right to elect a government which then spends state money on the poor, on universal health care, on providing jobs, on tipping the balance, which is in favour of the middle class towards ordinary working people. And that's highly political. And you can't have a consensus about that. You don't have a consensus on that kind of thing in any Western democracy. So I think it's a pipe dream to say you can have a consensus. What you need to have is a system whereby the people that believe in democratic decisions are in the majority, and that they suppress those that don't believe in democratic decisions. So in my opinion, the yellow shirts are my enemy, are the enemy of democracy. And unless we can make them shut up and accept democracy, we're not going to have democracy. And we make them shut up by building a strong pro-democracy movement. Now, Somsak talks about the Bhumipon consensus. It didn't come out of nothing, and I'm sure he would accept that. It actually came out, in my opinion, from the collapse of the Communist Party, the defeat of the Communist Party. So we're seeing a particular right-wing consensus gaining ground around Bhumipon coming out of the defeat of a progressive movement. So, you know, we won't see a time when there'll be a consensus where everyone will live happily ever after and accept democracy. There will always be arguments and divisions within society.
Okay. Yes, sir.
May I tell you a story about my younger nephew for sister? Okay, so he was 3 years old, and he was taught in his school, his kindergarten, to sing a song to praise the king. So we all Thai kids. So at this beginning of schooling, they are all already also propagandized, and so that's why even if Bhumipon was dead, still his legend, his everything was going on, and they're trying to keep this on going, and yeah.
I collected my son from school, Satijula Patom 1, Patom 2. He was telling me about Maharaja.
Yeah.
But he doesn't believe any of it.
Your kid. But others.
I don't think people are like easily brainwashed. I mean, society is full of conflicting ideologies. People will choose which they believe.
And especially now with technology, you know, it's much more difficult to keep people ignorant nowadays.
John?
During the last 5 years, I always see that there are only three big problems. First, Thai middle class don't believe anymore democracy. They don't believe in democracy. So Thailand would be democratic because the intellectual middle class they don't believe. Second, national-wide and deep contradiction, which no one knows the end. I always say during the last maybe 5 years, 6 years that the crisis, contradiction, I always say that the national-wide and deep contradiction which never happened in the history. Now, in more than 10 years, until now, no one knows the end. No one in Thailand even know the end. How to define, how to end the crisis? No one knows. No one knows. And the third problem. Both sides, not only both sides, but I think many people until now they don't know which regime which regime is suitable or best for Thailand. They didn't know. The yellow shirt, they don't like democracy, but they don't know which regime they want or they will fight for the regime. Deeply, they don't believe in monarchy because many yellow have been brought up by criticism of monarchy during year 50, year 60, year 50. But until now, they use the monarchy just to fight with the red shirt, just to fight with the shirt. Because I didn't have some contact with the yellow leader. I know what they think, what they are talking. I always tell the red shirt that when the yellow shirt meet and talk this time, they criticize, they condemn Rama more than red shirt condemn before.
Yep.
Almost all of them were like him, but they don't know how to eliminate. Because if they join us, they are afraid that Thaksin will come back.
Yeah.
Come back.
Right.
And deeply, they don't believe in Western democracy. They don't believe in Western democracy. So I think this very principal problem, the first problem over ED, middle class don't believe anymore in democracy. Second, division, contradiction in Thailand still go on, and more deeply. Like now, every issue in Thailand, like Lamjai Khai Thong Kham, the yellow shirt takes side Lamjai, the red shirt, the red shirt takes side Lamjai, the yellow shirt takes side even Priyo. Yes. So now every issue in Thailand is polarized. Is polarized, meaning that the crisis is still with us and deeper and more deeper. No. The solution, as I am former lecturer, many lecturers always ask me during the last 3 years that how to struggle.
Get Lamjai to lead the mass movement.
No, you just heard him. She polarized people, right? She polarized people.
And when they ask me how to fight, I said, no, I don't have. But
most of all, even the people in this, are you feel for the military or are you feel for the monarchy? I'm sure everybody gonna tell me that everybody feel that the fear is the problem for the Thai people. Why we can't uproar? Why we can't get the leader to uproar for this time? Why? Because they are fear. I think from this time now, and the rest of this afternoon, we should talk about how to stop people, Thai people, to fear. When they are not fear now, they will uproar, they will come up, they will cry for the democracy. You know, I have experienced all the people know why even there to like or comment on the Andrew MacGregor going just one or something. Why? Because the junta make them feel. You know, if you can solve this solution about stop the Thai people fear, everything will come up. If you can make the extremist realize that they just keep their light for the junta, try to make them come back to be reality that they should cherish their life, you know, and bring their life back from the junta. At that time, I'm sure we will become one, and then we will come out together and cry for our life back from the junta and the military and the monarchy. This is my addition for this meeting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Let me add some point to Anandaran's problems, namely the first and the third problem. The first one, some people in Thailand, the elite and some middle class, they don't care about democracy anymore because, like the friend over there said, that they live happy now. It's not affect them, and it's already good for them, and it's already good to live in the illusion. And why do people have hope in next generation, in something to change? But they don't. I don't think every people understand truly about what is democracy. They just wait for election and just to use their right. But if that process is already correct, like the new constitution is already blocked a lot of democracy process in election. Even though we have election, that's guarantee that we will have democracy. The third point, I don't feel comfortable with the camera.
The polarization?
Yeah. As Mr. Andrew said, the polarization this show less influence now, but it's not died out. It's always happened in both sides, and it always used as tool for them to fight to gather people. Like to think of the last mob, the last protest from Suthep. They start with anti-amnesty bill and change to anti-Ying Lak and change to everything, but they have no end goal. They just let military take everything because it's already maybe actually their real end goal. And to think of the movement, pro-democracy movement, I think we should think more about the goals, and we shouldn't ignore the abstract power.
Okay, thank you very much.
I'm optimist, so I see the point of Jajaran saying that the first one is that the elite and middle class they don't like democracy anymore, and I mean if they look at the way Prayut is running the country and the results, whether or not they'll learn from it. But as an optimist, I think that they can think for themselves that this is the direction that you want the country to go, where you want Thailand 4.0 only on the slogan, but in actuality you cannot, produce it, or you would, don't have you would have single gateway where people won't come in and invest, things like that. I think that through time people will realize, they will learn. Okay. As to the point of conflict, I think it's maybe a new experience for the Thai people But in any society, eventually they have to learn to live among them. They have to learn. It's a growing pain. It's a growing pain that we have to go through this period. But I think there's still light at the end of the tunnel.
Right. Our session is nearly over. I want to thank everyone for being so concentrated. And in a 3-hour session, it was quite a long time to concentrate on people speaking a foreign language. Does anyone want to add something to the debate before I let the panelists respond within 3 minutes each or so? Last words, closing words. You want to say something?
Actually, it's just for the information that we have the food for you for the lunch. It's the one I'm hungry now, so just wait a minute. But for the last word, I will give it to the others.
Thank God.
It's
Yes.
Okay. Any last words? I think lunch clinched it, so I'll let you three. Who wants to go first?
Yes.
Keep the same.
Again, thank you very much that all of you joined us today, and I can only repeat very briefly what I already mentioned. It's heartbreaking to see in which way Thailand has developed, and after the latest coup, and I really wish, personally for me, that I could go back, but it's not possible. And as long as this is not possible, I will try to the best of my ability to keep reporting on Thailand and Thai issues as a freelance journalist now based here in Germany. But one day I hope that all of us can return to a better Thailand. So yeah, I bring to freedom. Okay.
I'll also just add, thank you all for coming. And just to pick up on something, because I'm also an optimist. Ajahn Jaran, you were saying everything's polarized, even the conversations about Lamyai are polarized. But to me, they're not as polarized as the vicious battles we saw 5 or 6 years ago. There are people that disagree about Lamyai or Prao and these cases. They're usually debating. They're not generally saying, well, your view is invalid and you shouldn't be allowed to express it. They're having a debate, and as Ajahn Giles said, debate is good, that's what we want. We're never going to get to a Thailand where we're not polarized in the sense that everybody agrees where to go forward. But the way, as Ajahn Giles also said, so I'm agreeing with him for once, the way to go forward is to encourage debate, encourage discussion, encourage the rule of law. And getting back to your questions and some people's points about what are we fighting for? To me, that's what we're fighting for. We're not just fighting the end game. We're trying to create the principles where Thailand becomes a better place. And one of the key ways to do that is by speaking freely and breaking the fear about the lèse-majesté law. And that's why events like this are so important. Because even though there's a small number of us in the room, this is being seen by many people in Thailand. And because they can't discuss safely there, we hold the discussions here. And so thank you so much to everybody who joined in. This is why the junta hate Facebook. And this is why social media is important in this struggle. And everybody plays different roles. This is kind of the role that I have in this, is that I just try to, stimulate debate and report things, because other journalists and people in town can't. And so I think it will make a positive difference. And we have to learn that, just as on this panel, all of us have disagreements. We disagree often quite heatedly, and with Ajahn Somsak too, but we all agree on basic principles, and that's the way forward. Thank you so much.
I've been impressed by the participation from the audience in this meeting, which doesn't always occur in other meetings I've been to, so that's really good.
That's it?
Yeah.
Right, so lunch is served. Where does the second session start?